Here is week 1 of our brand new series, Battle Ready. It's about spiritual warfare, so sit back, relax, and enjoy Mark Pomeroy's message.
Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand.
Well, hey there to our Elevate Online family all around the world. Great to have you with us, today we're launching a brand new series called Battle Ready. And we announced that last week, and already we've had a great amount of feedback and excitement. People really looking forward to this series and what they're going to learn from it, and ultimately the tools they're going to learn to be able to apply to fight these battles that we have to deal with through our life. One of the goals, we've just come out of a series called Chasing Purpose, and one of the goals of that series was to demystify the idea of what it looks like and how we can actually line up with God's purpose. And this series, we have the same goal, or one of the goals of this series is the same, is that's to demystify spiritual warfare. When you say spiritual warfare, that means different things to different people, but one of the things it can mean is it can kind of freak people out. And so we want to really look at what God has to say about this subject and learn about the tools that we have access to, the weapons that we have access to, that we can actually apply in our everyday lives to ultimately set us up for the victory that Jesus wants us to experience in our lives. Now, I was going to call today's message, Who's Your Enemy and What Does He Do? But I'm aware that it's only people probably under the age of 45 that would get that dated movie reference. So I've actually called this message, Who's Picking the Fight? If we're in a spiritual war, who's picking the fight? And spoiler, the answer is the devil. He's our enemy, and he exists, and he has his stated objective to steal, to kill, and to destroy the plans and the purposes God has for us, Jesus followers. Now, before I get into talking more about who this enemy is and his origin story, let me say one thing. Let me insert an important qualifier. Not everything that's bad in your life and my life is caused by the devil. Some of the bad things that happen in our lives are actually caused by our dumb decisions. Some of the bad things that happen in our lives are actually caused by other people's dumb decisions, and we bear the consequences of those dumb decisions. So not everything is caused by the devil, but here's the thing. Whether chaos and calamity and bad things in our life is caused by the devil or not, he's either causing it or he's applauding it, because he wants to see us destroyed, taken down, and taken out. Straight out of the gate, let me highlight one of the most important truths that you and I need to understand about the devil, and it's simply this, that the devil is a liar. It's not just what he does, it's who he is. And one of the biggest, possibly the biggest lie that the devil has perpetrated in the world we live in today, and even, by the way, in some Jesus followers, is that he doesn't exist. He's just trying to just kind of hide in the shadows to the point where the obfuscation has caused people to kind of ignore him or even just doubt, or not doubt, rule out the possibility that he's real. And here's the problem with that. If you've bought that lie, you're an easy target. You're setting yourself up to be an easy target. If you don't know who the enemy is and what the enemy's strategies and objectives are, then you're unfortunately an easy target. So really all I want to do today to set this series up, Battle Ready, is to break down the origin story of this enemy known as the devil and set us up therefore today to have a greater understanding of who he is and what he's about and just a hint towards some of his tactics. And then next week, we're going to talk about how we fight back and how we fight to win. So the devil, he was a created angel, created by God. God created all of the angels that ever existed. His name was given him was Lucifer, which meant light bringer, which is actually, as far as the origin story goes, quite a compliment. That God actually set him up in heaven, called him Lucifer, which means light bringer, because God gave Lucifer the role of being a high-ranking worship leader. And this idea of Lucifer being a light bringer, that he would, as worship leaders do today, he would actually shine and direct the light towards God and say, look at God, look at how great God is, how beautiful, how perfect God is. And he was a light bringer. And then something happened. So put down Instagram, pick up Bible app, and how about you pop that open to Isaiah chapter 14. Now, Isaiah was a prophet, and a prophet is someone that kind of speaks on behalf of God. And some of what Isaiah spoke about on behalf of God was about the future. In fact, included hundreds of years before Jesus came to earth. It included Isaiah saying that this is what will happen when Jesus, the Messiah, comes. And some of what Isaiah talked about was current events, and also some of what Isaiah talked about on behalf of God was a recounting of historic events. And this is one of them. So let me drop you in to verse 12, where Isaiah, speaking on behalf of God, is calling out Lucifer, the light bringer. What a come down this, O Babylon, day star, son of dawn, light bringer, flat on your face in the underworld mud, you, famous for flattering nations. You said to yourself, I'll climb to heaven. I'll set my throne over the stars of God. I'll run the assembly of angels that meets on sacred Mount Zaphon. I'll climb to the top of the clouds. I'll take over as king of the universe. But you didn't make it, did you? No, instead of climbing up, you came down with the underground dead, down to the abyss of the pit. And that's it. That's the backstory, that Lucifer had this high-ranking position, and he kind of flew too close to the sun, in so much so that he wanted to actually take over from God. He wanted to take God's place. And here's the thing, God ain't giving that up for nobody. And so God cast him out of heaven. But understanding this leads us to understand this is the essence of the spiritual war, the spiritual battle that continues to this day. God and the devil are both asking us the question, who will you worship? And the devil, instead of shining the light towards God as he'd previously done whilst he was an angel in heaven. He's now shining the light on all sorts of things that are going to distract us and destroy us, are going to take our attention away from God and focus our attention on things that are actually going to move us away from God's plans and God's purpose and God's best for our lives. And here's the thing, when God cast Lucifer out of heaven, he didn't go on his own. In fact, a third of the angels in heaven abandoned heaven, abandoned heaven and went and followed Lucifer. And so Lucifer and that 1/3 of the angels that were previously in heaven, they are now what form the demonic realm that exists even to this world today. Now, apart from being a Thor movie from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there in Norse mythology, there is a place and a series of events called Ragnarok. And what this place and series of events were a battle of the gods, a battle for ultimate supremacy. Who's going to be the last God standing? And the last God standing wins, being the greatest, the ruler, and so on. This isn't how it happened. When Lucifer decided he was going to try and take God's place, God is so powerful and so mighty that in a split second, he threw Lucifer out of heaven. We're not in the midst of some intergalactic battle between God and the devil and who's going to win. No, God's already won. In fact, we sing a song in our current rotation at Elevate called My Testimony. And My Testimony, the opening line of it is actually something that Jesus said. Jesus was, one of the times in his public life, he was actually commanding demons, and they were listening to him. They were obeying him. And Jesus' closest followers were like, what is going on here? Even the demons obey you. And Jesus is like, yeah, I know. And Luke records this. Jesus said, I saw Satan fall, a bolt of lightning out of the sky. I was there when he tried to challenge my Father for the throne, and I was there when in response, in an instant, my Father threw him out of heaven like a bolt of lightning from the sky in an instant. So look, here we are. Only 5 minutes into our Battle Ready series, and I hope you're encouraged to know that the God of the universe, the God that you serve, the God that you follow, the God that you worship, not only will he not be challenged, he can't be challenged. He is so powerful that even the devil's best efforts pale into insignificance. Nothing compares to the power of God. Then we have, as far as the chronology goes, the next time that the devil shows up, he's been thrown out of heaven, he's now roaming the earth. The next time he shows up is around the creation story, the events of creation. But he doesn't insert himself at the beginning of the events of creation. He actually waited right to the last event of creation. He didn't show up when God created the heavens and the earth. He didn't show up when God created the landscape. He didn't show up when God created creatures that roamed the land and swam the seas and flew in the air. He showed up after God had created humanity. And the reason Lucifer waited to that moment is because humanity is the only thing God has ever created that is intended to reflect his image, to reflect his goodness, to reflect his perfection. And the devil felt threatened for that because he was given that opportunity. He was given the opportunity to reflect God, not to become God, but to reflect God, and he chose not to. He chose to try and become God. And so here he has this threat on the earth, Adam and Eve, created in the image and likeness of God, having a perfect, unbroken relationship with God, which he had but gave away. This is what happened. The serpent, the devil, was clever, more clever than any wild animal God had made, and he spoke to the woman, to Eve, "Do I understand that God told you not to eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "No, not at all. We can eat from the trees in the garden. It's only about the tree in the middle of the garden that God said, don't eat from it. Don't even touch it or you'll die." And the serpent told the woman, "Nah, you won't die. God knows that the moment you eat from that tree, you'll see what's really going on. You'll be just like God." Sound familiar? Knowing everything, ranging all the way from good to evil. Well, when the woman saw that the tree looked like good eating and realized that what she would get out of it, she'd know everything. She took and ate the fruit and then gave some to her husband, and he ate, and immediately the two of them did see what's really going on. That they'd been lied to, that they'd been deceived. Saw themselves naked, and they sewed fig leaves together as makeshift clothes for themselves. See, I told you right at the front of this message, the devil is a liar. It's not just what he does, it's who he is at every single opportunity. He'll use words and he'll use lies. Which actually comes as no surprise, because one of the primary roles of angels is to be messengers. You know, you read throughout history that of angels showing up at different times in history and speaking a message on behalf of God. Well, Lucifer was like that. His message was to actually tell people, hey, look to God, look to the Father. And yet he gave that up. But so he's very good with words. Yet instead of his words now being words of truth and life, his words today are words of destruction, death, distraction, suggestions. You could never do that. You could never be that. You could never break free from that. You could never overcome that. You could never influence them. You could never do what God's called you to do. Come on, who do you think you are? And on endless loop, the devil is competing. It's a turf war for here and for here. And he's trying to gain his advantage. He's trying to gain some ground by speaking lies and getting you and I to believe those lies to be true. Thankfully, and I promised this up front, thankfully, God has given us some tools. God has given us some weapons that when the devil comes at us, we're not left naked. We're not left vulnerable. We're not left on our own with only our own strength and our own power and our own smarts. We've actually been equipped by God. And this is how Paul explains the equipment, the weaponry, the armor that God's given us. He wrote this, Paul, one of the leaders of the early church, to a church in Ephesus, telling them what they've got access to. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Don't be strong in your mighty power, be strong in his mighty power. And by the way, one thing that I want to underline about God's mighty power is it's not given in advance of the circumstance. It's given in relation to the circumstance. And so when you face a new circumstance, your default might be to think, oh, I don't have the strength for this. I don't have the tools for this. And God says, no, you haven't needed them before, but I recognize the situation you're in. And so I'm going to give you the tools you need today to fight the battle you're facing today. So be strong in the Lord and his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God, not just a piece, not just a couple of pieces. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood. Makes sense? Explains a lot. But against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Let me land this today with something that John wrote. John was one of Jesus' chosen 12 and one of his closest of the 12. And he wrote this, and this is great news. When you start to have your eyes open to the reality that we have an enemy, and to the reality that enemy is waging war against us at all times, John wrote this, "You, dear children, are from God and have overcome them, because the one who is in you is greater than the one who was in the world. Be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. He's the one that threw Lucifer out of heaven like a bolt of lightning in an instant. He's the one that gives us access to the full armor of God, access to his strength, access to the sort of tactics and training and strategy and insight and wisdom and discernment and perspective that we're going to need to fight the battles that come our way. Greater is the one that is in you than the one who is in the world. So next week, we're going to look at how we put on the full armor of God and how we use the weapons, what they are, because there's a few, and how we use them to ensure that we don't just fight for victory, that we actually fight from victory, that we actually claim and experience the victory that Jesus has already won, that we get to experience that in our lives. So I cannot encourage you strongly enough to be back here with us, our online family, be back here next week. And here's the thing, if right now you're sitting in a room on your own, or on a couch on your own, or in a coffee shop on your own, hey, how about next week you invite someone to join you? Because I guarantee you know somebody who's fighting some battles. You know somebody who needs encouragement. And that's what this series is about, equipping and encouraging so that we can claim the victory that Jesus has already won for us. I'm going to bounce this now to one of our leaders here at our Perth hub, Elevate Hub. His name's Andrew, and here's a great story of victory that I know you'll be encouraged by. Here's Andrew.
Late 2009, or mid-2009 actually, I got married to the love of my life, Nikki. We met at a bar, the Mustang Bar in Northbridge. For some silly reason, Nikki gave me her number, and she knew that I was an accountant. So she called me about a week later and said, "Hey, remember you saying you're an accountant? Can you come do my taxes?" And eventually we did date, and Nikki did eventually come to me and say, you know, unless you're willing to go to church with me, I don't want anything to do with you. And I thought, well, I actually quite like this girl. And so I thought I made the decision right then and there to go back to church. And about 3 years into our marriage, we had our first son, Levi. He was just an absolute joy. And 3 years after Levi, we had Winter, our second child. I attended a worship night where my wife Nikki was leading the worship. And at one point during the night, we had a time of prayer. Well, at the end of the night, or end of the prayer session, God gave me one word, and that word was cancer. I didn't think much of it. In fact, I thought I was absolutely crazy. Eventually, you know, within a week of having that word, I got sick. And that night I went to hospital. The doctors and nurses gave me antibiotics and said, you know, patch me up after a day and after a night in hospital. It's time for you to go home. And so I went home, and 4 weeks later I still felt pretty average. The doctor sent me for a blood test again, and it came back. He said, your liver is not doing too well. And he sent me off for an ultrasound. So I went for the ultrasound, and the doctor scanned my liver. My liver was actually pretty good. And he scanned the rest of my organs, and he stopped at my right kidney. And this was a Thursday afternoon. And he probably took a good half an hour using the ultrasound on my kidney, and me going, oh, this doesn't seem good, what's going on here? I went and got a CT scan that afternoon and went through the machine, and the radiologist gave me the same story. He said, when are you seeing your doctor next? And I said, sounds like I'm seeing him first thing in the morning. And before the doctor's practice opened that day, I got a call 7 o'clock in the morning saying, please make a time to come and see my doctor. And I saw the doctor that afternoon. The doctor said I had a renal cell carcinoma on my right kidney. approximately about 6 or 7 centimetres in size. It was a bit of a shock. I didn't think that, I would be in the position where I would have cancer and unable to provide for my family, which is some thoughts that go through your head when you do have cancer. And also thoughts of how long have I got? When will this, is this it? Is this the sun setting of my life? And all sorts of thoughts were going through my mind then. Particularly, am I going to see my kids grow up? Is my wife going to be a single mum? What will happen? I'm not even going to go see my kids get married, going through high school. I'm going to live my life with them and they're going to grow up without a dad. And all weekend, I had this on my mind. And all I could think of was just, there's nothing you can do. Just surrender this to God and just trust God. So I spent the whole weekend praying and just giving it over to God and surrendering it to Him. And just really living in the moment of not knowing what was happening next. So the next doctor's appointment I had was to go see a specialist at the cancer. And she turned around and said that, this is cancer. You're 36 years old. It looks like it's contained to the kidney, which was the best news I had. She said the best course of action was to get the kidney removed as soon as possible. And 4 weeks later, that's exactly what happened. And before the diagnosis, I was struggling to work due to memory. I tried to start my own business, but obviously got the diagnosis, which kind of put a stop to that. I remember a week before actually going in for the surgery to have my kidney removed, 2 people actually offered me a job. One was 3 days a week and one was 2 days a week. And as if God had brought everything together, just so that, once I've finished my surgery and recovered, that I would walk straight into a job and be able to provide for my family. If I hadn't gotten sick, or if I hadn't have gotten the diagnosis at the stage it was, I'd be in a big trouble. I think the statistics would say that there's about a 10% chance of survival. Having that second chance was a miracle. It's such a gift that I'd see my children, that God was such a gracious God, that He gave me the chance to be the father that I wanted to be. And God has been great to me, because I'm cancer-free now for 2 years. And it's amazing.